All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into a pretty wild situation brewing in the world of international trade.
Wild is putting it lightly.
Yeah, I mean, it's February 2025. President Trump is back in the Oval Office. And, well, let's just say he's not exactly shying away from his favorite trade tactic, tariffs.
Oh, no, not tariffs again.
But
Haven't we been down this road before?
we have, but this time things are a little different, a little more intense.
Well, yeah, for starters, it's not just China feeling the heat this time around.
Right, Canada and Mexico are right there in the crosshairs, too. It's like America first on steroids.
Feels like he's swinging for the fences with this one.
So let's break this down. Remind us what Trump's tariff strategy was like during his first term, with the whole China trade war thing.
Yeah, so back then, it was all about those tariffs on Chinese goods, remember? It was a tit-for-tat kind of situation. China would slap tariffs on us, we'd hit back with even more.
And it went on for like, what, years?
Years, yeah. It was a pretty messy and unpredictable time for global trade. And now, well, he's brought Canada and Mexico into the mix. It's a whole new ballgame.
Okay, so we've got the context. But what's the real game plan here? What's driving this latest tariff frenzy?
Well, part of it seems to be, sticking with the same old playbook. Trump has always been very vocal about his belief that trade deficits are bad for the U.S. economy.
Right. He sees it as other countries taking advantage of that.
Exactly. And he also believes that, certain countries are playing unfairly, using tactics like currency manipulation and dumping cheap goods to undercut American businesses.
So the tariffs are supposed to level the playing field, is that it?
I think that's the idea, at least from his perspective. He wants to protect American industries, especially manufacturing, which he argues have been hurt by these unfair trade practices.
But there's something else going on here, right? It's not just about economics this time.
Yeah, you're hitting on something really important. This time around, Trump is invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA.
IEPA, wow. That's some serious stuff, isn't it?
It is. I mean, that's typically reserved for, major national security threats, like in times of war or terrorism.
And now he's using it to justify tariffs.
Exactly. And that's causing a lot of controversy. Critics are saying he's overstepping his authority, setting a dangerous precedent for future presidents to use IEPA for all sorts of things that have nothing to do with national security.
It does seem like a pretty big stretch, to be honest.
It does, and it raises some serious questions about the balance of power between the executive branch and Congress when it comes to trade policy. I mean, if IEPA can be used for this, what's to stop it from being used for, I don't know, almost anything?
So we've got the old playbook with a new and rather controversial twist.
Mm.
But let's get specific. What exactly is Trump hoping to achieve with these tariffs this time around?
Based on what we're seeing, it seems like it's a three-pronged strategy. First, as I said, there's that goal of reducing those trade deficits, especially with China.
Trying to tip the scales back in America's favor?
Yep. And then there's the second goal, which is protecting those U.S. industries, particularly manufacturing, which he feels have been getting a raw deal from foreign competition.
And the third prong.
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. It's not just about economics this time. He's also going after what he sees as non-trade issues, things like immigration and drug trafficking.
And he's using tariffs to do it.
Yeah, it's pretty unconventional. It's like he's saying, you want to trade with us, you've got to play by our rules, not just on trade, but on these other issues too. And Mexico in particular seems to be the target of this approach.
That's a pretty bold move. So we've talked about Trump's intentions. But how are the other players reacting to this whole tariff situation? Let's start with Canada. They're usually pretty level-headed, right?
They are, but they're not taking this lying down.
Yeah.
They've slapped retaliatory tariffs on a whole range of U.S. goods. We're talking about like 155 billion U.S. dollars worth of exports.
Wow, 155 billion. That's not messing around. What kind of goods are we talking about?
Everything from steel and aluminum, which, is kind of expected in these situations, but they're also hitting agricultural products pretty hard.
So they're sending a message.
They are. Prime Minister Trudeau has been pretty outspoken, calling the tariffs unjustified and harmful. But at the same time, Canada, they're all about diplomacy.
Right, they don't want to burn any bridges.
Exactly. So while they're defending their interests, they're also stressing the importance of the U.S.-Canada relationship and saying they want to keep those lines of communication open.
So it's a measured response.
Oh.
Firm, but still leaving room for negotiation. How about Mexico? They're in a bit of a tougher spot, given Trump's focus on immigration and drug trafficking.
Yeah, and their response has been, well, you could say defiant.
Not backing down?
Nope. President Claudia Sheinbaum has made it very clear that Mexico will not be bullied, that they're ready to protect their interests. She's pushed back hard against Trump's accusations about drug trafficking, calling it an attack on Mexican sovereignty.
So there's some real tension there.
Definitely. And while they haven't announced any specific retaliatory measures yet, they're clearly signaling that they're not afraid to fight back.
Okay, so Canada's playing it strategically, Mexico's standing their ground. What about China? They've been through this before with Trump. How are they responding this time?
Well, their response has been surprisingly muted, I guess you could say, at least compared to past trade spats.
Really, you'd think they'd be ready to go toe-to-toe with them again.
You would, but they've been emphasizing dialogue and cooperation, even though they have condemned the tariffs and hinted at possible countermeasures.
So are they just biding their time, waiting to see how things play out?
It's possible China's economy isn't exactly booming right now, so maybe they're hesitant to get into a full-blown trade war that could make things even worse for everyone.
Makes sense. So we've got this whole tangled web of motivations and actions and reactions. But let's zoom out for a minute. What does all of this actually mean for everyday people?
Well, the most immediate impact is likely to be, the dreaded P word, prices.
Oh, no, not higher prices.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. When tariffs are slapped on imported goods, those costs often get passed down to us, the consumers.
So we're talking about potentially seeing price hikes on, like, everything. Cars, electronics, food, clothing.
It's possible, and that could really put a strain on household budgets, especially for folks who are already struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah, that's a big concern. And beyond the impact on consumers, what about the broader economic implications? I mean, this can't be good for global trade overall.
It's definitely a risk. I mean, global supply chains, the way goods move around the world, it's all very interconnected. And tariffs can throw a wrench in all of that.
Yeah, I was reading about how the auto industry, for example, relies heavily on parts and materials from both Canada and Mexico.
Right. And if those supply chains get disrupted by tariffs, it can lead to production delays, shortages, and ultimately even higher prices for consumers.
So it's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another, and things just get more and more complicated and expensive.
Exactly. And then there are the geopolitical concerns, too. These tariffs could strain relations between the U.S. and its allies, making it harder to cooperate on other important issues.
It's not just about economics. It's about diplomacy and global stability, too.
Right. I mean, the world is interconnected in so many ways, and these actions have the potential to unravel those connections and create a more fragmented, less stable world. It's like we're at this critical juncture, and there's so much uncertainty about what the future holds.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. But I think that's a good place to stop for now. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have. We've looked at Trump's motivations, the responses from Canada, Mexico, and China, and the potential impact on the economy and global relations.
Right. And in part two, we'll delve deeper into some of the long-term implications of this escalating trade war and explore some of the emerging trends that could shape the future of global trade.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that these tariffs, they're just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Okay, so what's the bigger picture here?
Well, we're seeing this broader shift happening globally, a move towards protectionism and nationalism in a lot of countries.
So is this like a sign of things to come? Are we heading towards a world where global trade is less free, more tense?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, if other countries start following suit, retaliating with their own tariffs, we could end up in this spiral of protectionist measures that ultimately hurts everyone. It's like a dangerous game of chicken. Nobody wants to back down, but everybody loses if they collide.
That's a scary thought. So let's talk long-term implications. What are the potential consequences of this escalating trade war?
Well, it's tough to say for sure. There are so many factors at play, and the situation is constantly evolving, but we can definitely explore some potential scenarios.
Yeah.
One possibility is that these tariffs could actually end up backfiring and hurting the very industries Trump's trying to protect.
How could that happen?
Well, think about it. If American companies have to pay more for imported goods because of the tariffs, their costs are going to go up.
Right.
And that could make them less competitive on the global market.
And wouldn't that also mean higher prices for consumers, like we were talking about earlier?
Exactly. So the intention might be to protect American jobs and industries, but the reality could be quite different. Another potential consequence is the damage to relationships between the U.S. and its key trading partners.
Right. Canada and Mexico, they're not just our neighbors, they're close allies too.
Exactly. And straining those relationships could have far-reaching consequences, not just for trade, but for security and diplomacy as well.
It's not just about economics, it's about geopolitics too.
You're hitting the nail on the head. The global landscape is interconnected in so many ways, and these actions have the potential to unravel those connections and create a more fractured, less stable world.
So with all these potential downsides, is there any hope for a positive outcome? Could this situation actually be a catalyst for, I don't know, constructive dialogue and reform?
It's not impossible. I mean, there's always a chance that these tensions could lead to a renegotiation of existing trade agreements.
So maybe we could end up with more balanced and beneficial terms for all the countries involved.
Exactly. But it would require a willingness to compromise from everyone.
Right. Everyone needs to come to the table ready to find solutions that work for everyone, not just for their own interests.
Right. And that's a tall order in the current political climate, I have to say.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, let's shift gears a bit and look at some of the emerging trends and factors that could shape the future of global trade.
Okay, sounds good.
You mentioned earlier this shift towards protectionism, but are there any counter trends emerging?
There are. One major trend that's worth keeping an eye on is the rise of regional trade blocs.
Regional trade blocs.
Yeah, as global trade becomes more fragmented, we're seeing countries forming closer economic ties with their neighbors.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP for short. It's a trade agreement among 11 countries in the Pacific Rim.
So like Canada, Mexico, Japan, Australia.
Yep, those are some of the big players. And it basically lowers tariffs and trade barriers between them.
So it's kind of like a counter movement to the protectionist tendencies we're seeing elsewhere.
You could definitely see it that way. It's a signal that many countries are still committed to free trade and open markets, even as the global landscape gets more complicated.
It's interesting to see these different forces pulling global trade in different directions. What are some other factors we should be watching?
Well, technology is playing a huge role. E-commerce, especially, is making it easier for businesses to trade across borders, even small businesses.
So technology could be a force for greater openness and interconnectedness, even as political forces push in the opposite direction.
Exactly. It's opening up new opportunities for businesses to connect with customers and suppliers around the world, regardless of tariffs or trade wars. But of course, technology comes with its own set of challenges.
Like what? What kind of challenges?
Yeah. Well, there are concerns about cybersecurity, data privacy, and the impact of automation on jobs. These are all issues that need to be addressed as technology continues to reshape the global trade landscape.
It sounds like the future of global trade is going to be shaped by this constant tug of war between these various forces. Protectionism versus free trade, technological advancement versus political resistance. It's a lot to keep track of.
It definitely is. But it's also an incredibly fascinating time to be watching all of this unfold. The decisions that are made in the coming months and years are going to have a huge impact on the global economy and the lives of people all around the world.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What should they keep in mind as they navigate this complex and ever-changing landscape?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed and engaged. Pay attention to the news, do your own research, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
That's great advice. The more we understand about these issues, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions and advocate for policies that align with our interests.
Absolutely. And remember, the future of global trade isn't predetermined. It's being shaped right now by the decisions that we make, both as individuals and as a society.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this, well, this trade war that's heating up. We've talked a lot about the big picture stuff, the politics, the economics, but let's bring it all home for our listeners. This isn't just some abstract geopolitical game. It could actually hit us all right where it hurts, our wallets.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to have real-world consequences for everyone. I mean, think about it. If you enjoy your morning cup of coffee, you might want to brace yourself.
Oh, no, not my coffee.
I know, right? But seriously, a lot of the coffee we drink in the U.S., it comes from Mexico and Canada, and guess what? Those tariffs could make those beans a lot more expensive.
So my lattes are going to cost more.
Yeah.
Not a good start.
Yeah, it's just one example. Remember we were talking about the auto industry earlier. Same deal. If you're thinking about buying a new car, you might want to do it sooner rather than later. Prices are probably going to go up as those tariffs start to bite.
Okay, so my coffee, my car, what else? What other everyday things could be affected?
Well, it's not just about the things we buy directly, right? It's also about the jobs that depend on trade with these countries.
Right, if businesses start hurting because of these tariffs, that could mean job losses.
Exactly. Factories might close down, and it could have this ripple effect throughout the whole economy.
It's kind of scary when you think about it like that. So what can we do? I mean, are we just powerless bystanders in this whole global trade war thing?
I wouldn't say powerless. I mean, for starters, just being aware of what's happening is a big step. When we understand how these things affect us, we can make more informed decisions and advocate for policies that actually make sense for us.
So staying informed is key. But beyond that, what can we actually do to, make our voices heard?
Well, we can contact our elected officials, let them know how we feel about these tariffs. We can support organizations that are fighting for free and fair trade. And as consumers, we can choose to support businesses that are committed to ethical and sustainable practices.
So there are things we can do individually, but also collectively.
Absolutely. Global trade, it can be a good thing. It has the potential to create jobs, raise living standards, and bring countries closer together. But we have to make sure it's done fairly in a way that benefits everyone.
That's a great point. This might seem like something that's happening, way up there in Washington, but it can affect us all in very real ways.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, get involved. The future of global trade, it's not set in stone. It's being shaped right now by the choices we make, both individually and as a society.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to The Deep Dive. We hope this has given you a better understanding of this unfolding trade war, its potential consequences, and most importantly, what you can do about it. Stay curious, stay engaged, and remember, your voice matters. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.